Terraria and Dark Souls. I don't think these two games need an introduction. They're two of my favorite games and they actually have a lot in common, so I've been wondering. I'm an artist, so what if I took the weird fantasy vibes of Dark Souls and applied it to Terraria? These are actually my first sketches from like 6 years ago. I never continued though, until about a year ago when I decided to pick this project back up. But this time I decided to work my way through the game in order of progression, starting with King Slime. With him being the first one, I didn't really have a full idea of how to tackle this project yet. I wasn't sure how closely I wanted the design to resemble something out of Dark Souls. Too far in one direction and we just end up with Udex Gundyr, and too little and it just resembles the first sketch I drew all those years ago. I wanted to make him a little more unique, so I gave him a set of arms to flail around with, as well as a few other remnants of a former human body. I also interpreted the little slimes that he spawns as former soldiers that he absorbed into himself. But now with hindsight, while the slimes are pretty cool, I'm not so sure about the king anymore. You'll see later when we get to the queen. But for now, let's head to the second boss. Or the first real boss, depending on whether it finds you first. For this one, I couldn't really help myself but think about Bloodborne, which makes sense with the whole Cthulhu thing that Terraria is going for in. It's inherently Lovecrafting, so a little sprinkle of Bloodborne here and there won't hurt. Even though he's originally just a floating eyeball, I didn't want to restrict myself. So I give him a set of tentacles and I imagine he uses those to slingshot himself towards the player. I also tried another version to bring it closer to something you'd encounter in Dark Souls. Specifically these little guys from Dark Souls 3. They've always felt a little more eldritch to me than the other designs. And I actually kinda like this version, even if it bears no resemblance to the original eye anymore. Well, anyways, on to the Eater Worlds. My first thought was, well, the Karthus sandworm already exists, so I don't need to do anything. But I didn't want to skip it just like that, so instead I focused on one of its main characteristics. The fact that it splits into smaller worms as the fight progresses. I imagined something akin to the land octopuses from Elden Ring, or something like Rykard. I thought of a big mass of centipedes that slowly split off of the main body as the fight progresses. But I think I'd have to animate it to show what I really had in mind. Maybe I'll do that in the future. Well, next up, Brain of Cthulhu. Just like the eye, it very much reminded me of Bloodborne. I mean, amygdala, brain, Cthulhu, I think it speaks for itself. But like the Eater of Worlds, I couldn't just skip it, so I still tried to come up with my own version. I used the human nervous system as inspiration, and I also added teal to its color scheme in reference to the Moon Lord, which is also kinda fitting given it casts illusion magic. Well, out of the crimson into the jungle, next up is Queen Bee. After experimenting with a few regular bee designs, I went with a tried and true FromSoft classic. A pretty woman's upper body with a monstrous lower body. One of the most recognizable characteristics that Queen Bee has are these disgusting trypophobia-inducing holes that she has at the bottom of her abdomen. Ugh. So as much as I hated it, I had to include them in her design as well. I just went ahead and covered those holes in rotten honey to make them a little more bearable. And time to head to the dungeon. Even though Skeletron is very iconic to Terraria, being the final boss when the game first came out and being the guardian to the dungeon, I just felt he needed just a little bit more. He really is just a skeleton after all. I wanted the old man's curse to be reflected in his design. At this point in time, I didn't even know if I wanted to tackle the mechanical bosses. So I just went ahead and gave him Skeletron Prime's 4 arms. This also came with the benefit of differentiating him from High Lord Wolnir. And that's actually almost all of the bosses before hard mode. The only one missing? Deerclops, of course. I honestly kinda just drew this one for fun, since he's part of a crossover and not really a Terraria boss. Okay, but now the actual final boss before hard mode. The Wall of Flesh. I wanted to make the urgency of being chased by this giant monstrosity a major part of its design. So I made 3 different versions all escalating in intensity. So while the first version is a giant demon that chases you around, the second and the third one incorporate the level into the design as well. I imagined something similar to the Bed of Chaos or the Ancient Wyvern, where the player has to navigate through the underworld while also being pursued by the wall. And just like in Terraria, where the wall gets faster and faster as the fight progresses, maybe in this version the wall gets bigger and bigger. And while it would essentially become a gimmick fight, we kinda need those, don't we? Well, with the Wall of Flesh defeated, it's time for hard mode. And the first boss in hard mode is Queen Slime. I didn't just want a repeat of King Slime, so I wanted to experiment a bit and take a few creative liberties. Although one thing I really liked about King Slime was that little hint of humanity that he still has in him. So I tried to put that into the Queen as well, but give it a slightly different flavor. I'd like to think that she has just a little bit more humanity left in her than the King. And those crystals on her back might play a little role in that. And now that I also have a better grasp of what I want the slimes to be like in general, I definitely want to make a dedicated video where I redesign King Slime to make him match his queen, and go a little deeper into the lore of their kingdom. And speaking of lore, this next part was a big challenge in that department. As I've said, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do the mechanical bosses, with them having sci-fi designs and all that, but I gave it a shot anyways. I wanted to find a way to incorporate their designs into a fantasy setting. Of course, my first thought was necromancy, but I wanted it to have a scrappy twist. Imagine the only tools you have available are sourced from Blighttown. And the same thing goes for the Destroyer in Skeletron Prime. I think the lore of the mechanic being imprisoned by the Lunar Cultist is actually quite intriguing. It kinda fits a Dark Souls-y narrative as well. I can definitely imagine an obtuse questline revolving around her. And that's definitely something I want to explore in the future. But for now, I'm pretty satisfied with the designs I came up with. With the mechanical bosses out of the way, it's time to move on to the jungle. I made quite a few versions of Plantera, but one thing stayed the same. Well, technically not from Dark Souls. I used the Shadow Tree avatar as inspiration for my first two designs. And for the next two, I wanted to incorporate a few more human elements. Mostly because I already have a few plans of what I want to do with her in the future. And speaking of plans, I kinda didn't really have any for the Golem. I was actually surprised at how many parallels the Jungle Temple has to Dark Souls' Ascent's Fortress. A large dungeon filled to the absolute brim with traps, guarded by snake people, and culminating in a giant golem boss fight. That is kind of poetic. And quite fittingly, just like after acquiring the Lord Vessel in Dark Souls, the game opens up, giving the player lots of opportunities to tackle new events and fight a bunch of optional bosses. The first one that comes to my mind is the Duke. Technically it's possible to fight him way sooner, but who does that? But then again, if you're up for the challenge, go for it. Sounds like another thing straight out of FromSoft's playbook, doesn't it? Or rather, just good game design in general. Well, either way, as you can see, I tried a few versions for Duke Fishron. Dragons play a very big role in Dark Souls, with them being the primordial rulers and all that. So I wasn't sure if I wanted him to be a true ancient dragon, or rather have him be a lesser wyvern. And to be honest, I'm still not sure. Terraria really doesn't have any dragons, so I think there's a lot of room for me to add some creative liberties and expand upon them, but I think that's something for another time. For now, let me show you some more optional content. Terraria has quite a lot of events, but not all of them feature a boss, and one of them's just straight up an alien invasion. So I decided to focus on the Pumpkin and the Frost Moon events. For example, when it comes to the Pumpkin, I tried to enhance the Scarecrow and Grim Reaper aspects of his design, and since the event gets quite hectic once you have to start fighting multiple of them, I decided to just draw a second one and turn it into a dual boss fight. Frostmoon, on the other hand, is very different. I focused on the only fantasy boss in that event. She already reminded me of everyone's favorite invisible princess, so her design is an homage to Priscilla. And now, it's time for probably one of the hardest bosses in the game. Another one of FromSoft staples. Sister Frida, Lady Maria,
Melania, Blade of Mikola.
I think the Empress of Light is a perfect fit right next to them, especially if you're willing to fight her during the day. I've experimented quite a bit with her looks, but I definitely wanted to capture the same energy that these women radiate. A fierce warrior with unfaltering dedication to do anything in her power to make sure that you don't make it out alive. Her boss fight would be an absolute spectacle. I don't think concept art alone will be able to do it justice. And I can't wait to do something about that later. Well, time for the final stretch. The leader of the lunar cult that imprisoned the mechanic and cursed many others in search of finding a suitable host for the old one. And with his defeat at the hand of the player, the final events are being set into motion. A shift in reality that brings other cosmic entities with it. But the lunar pillars themselves wouldn't be a boss fight. They are the burning Erd Tree, the eclipse, and the stage for the final boss. I mean, what else is there to say? An eldritch godlike entity? He's Cthulhu. I had the same issue again. The artists at FromSoft have already done it better than I ever will. Just like Amygdala is the perfect brain of Cthulhu, Moon Presence is basically the perfect Moonlord already. And with so much Bloodborne around, it was kinda hard to keep it within the bounds of Dark Souls. Whatever. At this point in time, I've already decided to make it my own thing. And with that in mind, I did the unthinkable. I gave the Moonlord legs. And with him being the last boss, I also gave him something special. Well, that's all the bosses. At least 95% of them. And I'm not done yet. I still want to keep going and design a few enemies and NPCs and the world overall. So if you liked what I've done so far and want to see more, feel free to subscribe. I'd very much appreciate that. Thank you for watching.